November 14th, 1973. 40 million Americans were watching The Tonight Show when something happened that no one could explain. Dean Martin was sitting across from Johnny Carson. The audience was laughing. The band was playing. Everything was exactly the way it had been for 1,000 shows before. Then Dean reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, and Johnny Carson, the man who had never been speechless in his entire career, went completely silent. Not for a moment, not for a pause. For nearly 2 full minutes, the king of late night said absolutely nothing. His hands stopped moving. His smile disappeared. His eyes locked onto Dean Martin like the rest of the world had vanished. 40 million people watched. No one understood what was happening. The studio audience went quiet. Ed McMahon leaned forward, confused. The band stopped playing mid-note. Because Dean Martin was reading a letter out loud. A letter he had written himself. A letter that contained a secret Johnny Carson had buried for over 15 years. A secret about a night in 1958 that almost ended everything. A secret about what Johnny had done for Dean when no one else would. A secret so personal, so painful, so private that Johnny had made Dean swear to never speak of it again. But on that November night, in front of the entire country, Dean Martin broke his promise, and what he revealed would leave Johnny Carson in tears, the audience in stunned silence, and America witnessing the most raw, unscripted moment in television history. This is the story no one was supposed to hear. If you stay until the end, you will understand why this moment changed both of their lives forever. So tell me, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments and make sure you are subscribed. Because what Dean said in that letter is something you will never forget. To understand why that letter destroyed Johnny Carson's composure, you have to understand what these two men really meant to each other. To the public, they were entertainment royalty. Dean Martin was the coolest man in show business. Johnny Carson was the sharpest wit on television. When they appeared together, America expected jokes, laughter, and effortless charm. But behind the cameras, there was something else entirely. Their friendship started in 1957, before either of them had become legends. Johnny was a struggling game show host, barely paying his rent. Dean was fighting to prove he could survive without Jerry Lewis. They met at a small club in New York City. Both were performing the same night. Both were terrified they would never make it. After the show, they sat at a bar until 3 in the morning. Two men who the world would eventually worship, talking about failure, fear, and the loneliness of trying to make strangers laugh. That night, something clicked. Dean saw something in Johnny that others missed. Behind the clever jokes and perfect timing, there was a man running from pain he never discussed. Johnny saw something in Dean, too. Behind the effortless cool and the glass of whiskey, there was a man who trusted almost no one. They made an unspoken agreement that night. No matter what happened, they would have each other's backs. No matter how famous they became, they would stay real with each other. But they also made a rule. Their friendship stayed private. No grand gestures on camera, no emotional displays for audiences. What they shared belonged to them alone. For 16 years, they kept that rule. Through Johnny's painful divorces, through Dean's private heartbreaks, through the pressures of fame that crushed other men, they never broke the rule. So, when Dean Martin walked onto the Tonight Show stage on November 14th, 1973, with a letter in his pocket, Johnny Carson had no idea that everything was about to change. He had no idea that his best friend was about to say publicly what they had never spoken out loud. And he had no idea that the secret he had buried since 1958 was about to be revealed to 40 million people. November 14th, 1973, a Wednesday night. The Tonight Show studio in Burbank was electric. The audience knew Dean Martin was the guest, and the energy was different. These two together meant television gold. Johnny opened with his monologue. Jokes about Nixon, jokes about the economy. The audience laughed exactly when they were supposed to. Ed McMahon delivered his famous laugh right on cue. Everything was perfect. When Dean walked out, the applause was thunderous. He was wearing his signature tuxedo, holding what looked like a glass of apple juice, pretending to be whiskey. He kissed Johnny on the cheek the way he always did. The first 10 minutes were exactly what America expected. Dean told a story about Frank Sinatra getting locked out of a hotel room. Johnny laughed so hard he dropped his pencil. They traded jokes about golf, about Hollywood, about getting old. 40 million Americans were having a good time. But something was different. Johnny noticed it first. Dean kept reaching toward his jacket pocket, then pulling his hand back. His timing was slightly off. His eyes kept drifting somewhere else. During a commercial break, Johnny leaned over. "You okay, Pally?" Dean just nodded. "I got something I need to do, John. Just trust me." Johnny felt something cold in his chest. He had known Dean for 16 years. He had never seen that look before. When they came back from commercial, Dean did not reach for another joke. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper, folded twice, worn at the edges like it had been carried for days. The audience went quiet. "Johnny," Dean said, and his voice was different now. The smoothness was gone. The performance had stopped. "I wrote something, and I need to read it to you." Johnny's smile started to fade. "I know we had a rule," Dean continued. "I know you're going to be angry, but I'm 60 years old, and I've learned that some things can't stay buried forever." Johnny did not move. Dean unfolded the paper. "This is about a night in 1958, a night you told me to never mention again." Johnny's face went pale, and 40 million Americans leaned closer, not understanding what was happening, but knowing they were witnessing something that was not supposed to be on television. If you are still watching, drop a comment right now telling me where you are from. And stay with me, because what Dean read next is the reason Johnny Carson never forgot this night. The studio was completely silent. Dean's hands were steady, but his voice carried a weight no one had heard before. He began reading. "Johnny, we have known each other for 16 years. In all that time, I have never told you what you really mean to me. Tonight, I am breaking our rule, and I am sorry, but not really." A small laugh rippled through the audience, but it faded quickly. Dean continued. "In 1958, I almost quit. Not just show business, everything. My marriage was falling apart. The critics said I was nothing without Jerry. I believed them. I had a bottle in one hand and nothing left in the other." Johnny's jaw tightened. His eyes never left Dean. "One night, I called you at 3 in the morning. I do not remember what I said, but I remember what you did. You drove 45 minutes in the rain. You sat with me until the sun came up. You did not try to fix me. You did not give me advice. You just stayed." Dean's voice cracked slightly. He paused, then kept going. "When I finally fell asleep, you cleaned up my apartment. You threw out every bottle. You left a note on my counter. I still have that note, Johnny. You know what it said?" Johnny shook his head slowly. His eyes were glistening. It said, "You are not alone. Call me when you wake up. I will answer." Dean looked up from the paper. "You answered, Johnny. Every single time. For 16 years, every time I called, you answered." The audience was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. "The world thinks you are the king of late night. They think you are the quick wit, the perfect host, the man with all the clever answers. But I know who you really are." Dean's voice grew stronger. "You are the man who showed up at 3 in the morning. You are the man who never told a soul what you did for me. You are the man who saved my life and then acted like it never happened." Johnny's hand came up to his face. He was no longer trying to hide it. "I have won awards, Johnny. I have sung for presidents. I have performed for millions of people. But the thing I am most proud of in my entire life is that I get to call you my friend." Dean folded the letter. "You told me to never mention that night again. You said it was private. You said it did not matter." He looked directly at Johnny. "But it does matter, and I wanted 40 million people to know what kind of man you really are. Not the host, not the star, the man." For a long moment, nothing happened. Johnny Carson, the man who had filled 20,000 hours of television with words, sat in complete silence. His eyes were red, his hands were trembling. His perfect composure, the mask he had worn for 2 decades, was completely gone. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. The audience waited. Ed McMahon wiped his eyes. And America witnessed something they had never seen before. Johnny Carson, completely, utterly human. Dean reached over and placed his hand on Johnny's arm. No words, just presence. Just 2 friends, sharing a moment that no script could have written. For nearly 2 minutes, Johnny Carson did not speak. The studio audience sat perfectly still. They understood somehow that they were not watching a show anymore. They were witnessing something sacred. When Johnny finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "Dean." He stopped, shook his head, tried again. "You were not supposed to do that." The audience laughed softly, releasing a tiny fraction of the tension. But Johnny was not finished. 16 years, Johnny said, his voice rough. 16 years I have kept that night private, because that is what you do for the people you love. You do not take credit. You do not make it about yourself. He looked at Dean. "But you always were a stubborn Italian." Dean smiled. "The stubbornest." Johnny reached up and took off his glasses. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He did not try to hide it. "You want to know why I drove 45 minutes in the rain?" Johnny asked. Dean nodded. "Because 6 months before that, when my marriage fell apart, when I was sitting alone in an empty apartment wondering if I had made a mistake with my entire life, someone called me. Someone showed up. Someone sat with me until I could breathe again." Johnny pointed at Dean. "You did that. You probably forgot, but I did not." Dean's smile faded. His eyes grew wet. "We do not talk about these things," Johnny said, turning to the audience. "Men of our generation, we were taught to keep it inside. Handle your problems. Do not show weakness." He paused. "But maybe that is wrong. Maybe the strongest thing a man can do is tell his friend the truth." Johnny stood up. He walked around his desk, something he almost never did on camera. And in front of 40 million Americans, Johnny Carson hugged Dean Martin. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was not the usual Tonight Show applause. It was something deeper, something that came from a different place. When they finally separated, both men were crying. "I hate you for doing this," Johnny said, laughing through his tears. "I know," Dean replied, "but someone had to." Behind them, Ed McMahon was openly weeping. The band members were wiping their faces. Even the camera operators were struggling to keep their composure. That night, television stopped being television. It became something real. If you are still here, comment below and tell me what country you are watching from. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this story is not over yet. By the next morning, The Tonight Show had received over 20,000 phone calls. Newspapers across America ran headlines about the moment two legends showed the world what friendship really looked like. NBC executives called it the most talked-about segment in the show's history. But the numbers were not what mattered. What mattered was what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Johnny and Dean sat backstage for over an hour. No producers, no handlers, just two friends who had finally said out loud what they had carried silently for 16 years. Johnny's producer said later that he had never seen Johnny so quiet. Not sad, just peaceful. Like something heavy had finally been lifted. In the weeks that followed, something shifted between them publicly. Dean appeared on The Tonight Show 4 more times that year. Each time there was a moment, a look, a pause that carried the weight of that November night. They stopped hiding their friendship. But the private change was even bigger. Johnny started calling Dean every Sunday. Not for any reason. Just to talk. Dean told a reporter years later that those Sunday calls meant more to him than any standing ovation. "Johnny taught me something that night," Dean said. "He taught me that showing up for someone is not weakness. It is the whole point." Their friendship, once hidden, became something they protected openly. And when the dark days came, when tragedy struck in ways neither of them could have predicted, that foundation would be the only thing that kept them standing. Because the hardest moments were still ahead. In 1987, Dean Martin's son, Dean Paul, was killed in a plane crash. Dean never recovered. He stopped performing. He stopped leaving his house. He stopped caring about anything. But every Sunday, his phone would ring. Johnny Carson, calling like he always did, not to fix anything, just to be there. When Dean himself passed away in 1995, Johnny was one of the last people he spoke to. And when Johnny died in 2005, they found something in his desk drawer, a folded piece of paper, worn and faded. The note Dean had kept since 1958. "You are not alone. Call me when you wake up. I will answer." Johnny had made a copy. He had kept it for over 40 years. 2 men, 2 legends, one friendship that outlasted fame, tragedy, and time itself. The letter Dean read on that November night was never about television. It was about something television rarely shows. The truth. The truth that real friendship is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up. It is about answering the phone. It is about saying what matters before it is too late. If this story moved you, subscribe for more true stories about the moments that remind us what really matters. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, the people you love need to know it now. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. So tell me, where are you watching from? And who are you going to call after this video ends?